I would now like to invite our next panelist, Abhilasha Purwar. She's the founder and CEO of Blue Sky Analytics. Very accomplished lady. She's done applied chemistry from IIT Varanasi, has a Master of Environmental Management from Yale School of Management, was the founder, so she founded the Blue Sky Analytics 3 years ago, and it's already interesting to see what all the company has done in this short amount of time. And we're looking forward to having her in the Netherlands and do many more interesting things with her. So Abhilasha, over to you. Do you have a slide? Okay, so you can talk from here. Is it a question or should I just talk? Yeah. You just talk and then later on we'll do questions. Got it. How much time?
I hope I'm audible. My name is Abhilasha Purwar, and just a small correction. I went to environment school at Yale and not management school. No worries. I think I've been an environmentalist since I was like 20 years old, and that is not from an activist perspective. It was more from a problem-solving perspective. I always thought of environment and climate change as the biggest challenge for the planet, and that is where most of the business would lie. And this has been my thesis for my personal career, my company since early 2010s. What Blue Sky does, as Akansha had mentioned, is we operate in the satellite data space. So we analyze huge volumes of satellite data. Sorry, we don't have a slide deck because I thought it was a panel discussion. And we have been analyzing about 40 to 50 terabytes of satellite data at the moment. When we started 3 years ago, honestly, everybody was like, you should open either a nonprofit or an NGO, or become part of some research institute, go to some IIT or something. You're not going to be able to run or build a company in this segment. Something we thought was that there are so many satellites going up in the space, and the sensors and their power and the technology is going so faster. The sensors, similar to the sensors on your phone, are now much lower cost and have much higher resolution. So just like your phone libraries are filled with so many pictures, and you need like more software capacity to be able to store those pictures, to analyze, to make sense of those pictures. You have the similar problem happening in the space, where you have more and more satellites going up and very few people analyzing the pictures or the data that is sent by those satellites. That is where we focused our business on. And there are many use cases. Ironically, Earth observation or satellites have been the biggest source or the biggest contributors in the climate change research since the beginning of time. It was in the early 1960s and 70s that the climate scientists were looking at satellite data to be able to understand things about our planet. And then in the late 90s, telecommunication picked up as a bigger space segment. But I think it's time for Earth observation to come back, especially now in this coming decade, when we will have climate change as the biggest challenge. I'm coming back from COP, so all the countries have made amazing promises. Our country has made a promise of going net zero by 2070. 100 countries have signed a pledge on deforestation. And a question to ask for yourself is, how will you monitor it? If there is a deforestation event happening somewhere on the planet, how will you know? There is just simply no way to know except for satellites. If there are coal power plants or large industries which are doing a lot of pollution, which are creating carbon emissions beyond what they promised. They said, I'm going to go net zero by 2025, but this is 2027 and they are still producing millions of tons of carbon emissions. Who is going to be the monitoring body for all of these matters? Till now, environmental monitoring has been a majorly government sector or a third party which is typically hired by the corporation. So a corporation will hire a bunch of environmental consultants, pay them, and then they will produce a report. And in this time, when we have this as a biggest challenge, you can think of carbon accounting, environmental auditing is going to take the similar space as currently financial accounting has. And you can see that transition happening with companies like Deloitte and KPMG, who have been traditionally financial accountants and are now becoming carbon accountants and environmental accountants. And that is where Blue Sky literally operates as a data provider. Our goal when we started in 2019, our first investor, I think in February, was like, okay, so Abhilasha, you're trying to build something like Bloomberg for environmental data, and I think he couldn't have been more spot on. That is what we are doing even today. We have a large data set on air pollution in India. Before we existed, there were 250 data points for air pollution in the entire country. So you knew data about like Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay, but you had just no details about, let's say, Lucknow or a small town or village between Delhi and Lucknow. Now, with the data that we have been able to produce, using satellites, ground sensors, leveraging AI, you have 3.3 million data points for India. So you can go to every kilometer. If you have a village or a farm or a factory, you can go to that particular latitude, longitude, and figure out what is the air quality in that location right now. Similarly, building on the same modeling that we've done, same technology, we're also able to tell you what is the emissions coming from that location. And another data set we produced was our forest fire data set, forest and farm fire data set. So I think everybody here knows what's happening in Punjab and why North India is under a cloud of air pollution. We burn about 30 million tons of crop waste in a matter of 6 weeks, which is a recipe for a lot of air pollution. Using the Blue Sky data sets and our technology, you can monitor every single farm and you can tell which farm burnt on which date, how many tons of emissions came from that, how many tons of biomass was burnt, did this farm burn last year, or not this year. You can tell all of those trends. Our data set goes back to 2015, I think. And that same data set is also available for places like California, Siberia, Amazon. I would say, I think we are one of the first companies out of India which has built such a global data set. One of our partners is an initiative led by Vice President Al Gore, ex-Vice President Al Gore, which is called Climate Trace Coalition, within which we are actively monitoring carbon emissions from each and every sector across the planet. Blue Sky took the part of farm and forest fires, and we will be expanding into industrial emissions and coal power plants. Do I have time or? Awesome. I would love some questions and a little more interactive session actually, because it feels like I'm giving a speech and everybody's sleeping. So if you do have questions, please, I think somebody in the back has a question. And I know like satellite, AI, it's very, it seems rocket science, but trust me, it's very easy. There's a question there. Can someone take the mic?
Thank you. My outstanding question from a long time actually is, how do you deal with the problem of looking at the pixels on the top of a 100 or 300 kilometer column of air and figuring out what's happening below that? Like, how do you solve the inverse problem? Is that something which you've done, or?
Can you repeat the question again?
So, suppose you want to track the emissions at a farm level, like who's burning biomass or who's polluting at the ground level, right? Let's say that you're looking at it from the top, so you're seeing on top of the clouds, you're seeing on top of that whole column of air, right? So, I just wanted to know if you have, like an inverse problem where you have to map from readings at the top of that air column to on the ground, and how accurate that modeling is, because I've heard that that's an outstanding problem, and I just wanted to understand the progress on that.
Got it. So cloud correction, what you're talking about, is a very critical problem. Many a times what happens is that there's a large cloud, which is because of which we're not able to get data for that particular location at that particular time. Something to think about is that we are taking data from multiple satellites and not just relying on one satellite. So often we get like 5, 7, 8 snippets or snapshots for the same location in span of a week. And for different locations like US or Europe, where there are more satellites up in the space, you get even more snapshots. So if there was a cloud in that particular location at, let's say, today, there might not be cloud tomorrow, and we will be able to retrieve data. Another thing that we do typically in modeling is that we don't just use one parameter to derive at the final parameter. So if I'm looking at, let's say, how much is carbon emissions from that particular farm fire, I'm not just using the event of burning, but many other calculations, which is like, what was the biomass in the last standing crop? So you're taking up multiple data set, and that is why we're looking at the size of data, which is 40 to 50 terabytes. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, the overarching question is if you want to do carbon accounting at ground level, right? How accurate are the models? But I guess that's an open question then.
The models are getting more accurate by the day, and the function is one, the ground sensors. So more that we have ground sensors
Got
to
it,
be
yeah.
able to calibrate our model, we get more accurate, and more we have satellite data or its resolution, we get more accurate.
Got it, yeah, thank you.
And also another thing is when you do get our data set, you have the versions on those data set and you have the last calculated accuracy on the data catalog page itself. So as a customer, if you're buying the data set, you get all of this information. I can hear you. I can hear you clearly, yeah.
I'm Abhilasha, the president and the and I'm extremely happy to be here today. And I was very pleased by what your lead function and the role of Holland in this aspect, which I would consider the Dutch invented the telescope to look out. Now they're looking from outside within the planet. And I'm intrigued about your work, which is in Blue Sky, which you're doing data analytics about the oxygen, air. It would be nice if you could tell me if you're doing it on water as well, and the movement of water and the glacial melt. Because this is one aspect which in fact I would say that the Dutch can help us, and we have our own Holland in India as well, and that's Cuttack. If you know that Cuttack is similar to anywhere in Holland, and the Katjodi and Mahanadi have for centuries been around Cuttack, and Cuttack is like a trough, and yet there's no flooding in Cuttack, as is not in done. Now, why I'm talking about this and leading on to is that from Indo-American Chamber, we just collaborated with the UP government to have a climate conclave about 3 weeks ago. And I'm extremely impressed by the fact that the government out there, including the chief minister, politics apart, that's got nothing to do with politics, he had his facts on his fingertips when he was talking about glacial melt and talking about, and the fact that it's the Ganges Basin, right? And as we have seen with the pandemic, the future is in our bedrooms today, now, right? And if we don't recognize that, then we are going to be hit by more than one pandemic, and not a pandemic, but including sudden things like Uttarakhand floods, which happen overnight, etc. It's going to increase. So perhaps Holland can collaborate with various governments, especially the Uttar Pradesh government, to do predictive analysis about what the movement of water is going to be like, and how would you cope with it, like Holland has coped with it for centuries. How do you anticipate those water movements and have population shifts, and you don't have industries and people dying or getting demolished by sudden surges, right? So from your data analytics company, I'd be interested that we would collaborate with you, and we are having a major global convention later on next year, where we would like your inputs. Interestingly, aerospace is my personal interest since my childhood. My father was an aerospace engineer. And I'd like to say that there's more than one way that aerospace and defense actually impacts our day-to-day lives, and people don't know. Most of the research and terra firma activity, observations from satellites happens through defense technologies. And it's from there, even simple things like in the NASA program, which incidentally is not an American program, okay? It's a German program. It's Werner von Braun who was the father of the NASA program. And I must say, it's a fact that when he died, and the last one, the NASA rocket went up, and there was an O-ring failure, which led to that rocket misfiring, right? So 101 burn wasn't there at that time. But what I'm trying to say here is that when they sent man to moon, they didn't know how to insulate the suit from a leakage of oxygen. So they invented these, in place of a zipper, the Velcro straps, right? And they said, if someone falls ill, how do you take care of his temperature? So they invented and they formed the Crocin tablet. This is just two of the aspects, right, of aerospace technology. So I'd be interested to know if you're doing it on water along with air, and what are you doing to map this and make a kind of a model which can guide the government? Thank you.
Thanks so much for this question, actually. So similar to, how it happens for like NASA, when you take a crack at a problem which is very challenging and which is very big, you don't just find the solution to the problem you were attempting, but you find many solutions. So what happened with our company was that our first goal was to monitor air pollution in India. We just wanted to know how much is air quality and where is this pollution coming from. But the challenge was that satellite data is very bulky. There were not a lot of data scientists in India who knew how to work with it. And most of the previous analytical technologies were, the whole stack was not on cloud. So you needed these supercomputers. If you remember 10 years ago, people who were working on satellite data would work in some few physical locations on supercomputers. In contrast, my company does not have a physical office. I'm trying to take a car loan and HDFC Bank tells me that I can't because I do not have an office. And that's because our entire company is remote. Our office is laptop and internet. There are people working out of beaches, mountains, wherever. And that's where I think there's a huge part of the role which comes for India or Indian folks in this, because when it comes to capital infrastructure, launching satellites, building stuff, we don't always have access to that liquidity. But when it comes about human capital and very, very intelligent, very, very mathematically, quantitatively trained engineers, I would say India probably beats every other country on the planet. And that's where what we started doing was not just analyzing data and creating data sets or analytics, but building out the software stack which you will need to be able to analyze such huge volumes of data. So it's not just we're not just a data company, but we've ended up becoming a SaaS company as well, which has an operating system which is really efficient in analyzing satellite data. When we started doing that, 2 years ago, we started random POCs. So it's what all can we do with satellite data? And that's where we started monitoring lakes and rivers. There was a small project that we actually did with Tamil Nadu government, with Chennai, which was having a zero water day situation at that time. I think this was summer of 2019. And the IAS officer contacted us, was hey, can you guys just help me know how the shape and size of my lakes is changing over time? And if I can get an early warning about them, so that when we are approaching situation like that, we can let our population know, let's say, a little more in advance to start conserving water or to start preparing for these situations. We started running AI on those and building models, and now we are going for, in 2022, we will be launching products on monitoring India's water capacity. So both the quantity and quality of various rivers and lakes, including glacial melts also. I would say the challenge for us to doing all of this is it requires capital. At the end of the day, it's not as capital intensive as launching satellites in space, but still you have to pay salaries of these really, really competitive people that Google and Amazon wants to soup for really high salaries. So that's one challenge. And also finding the customers, because it's not that clear. You think that this is a very useful data, it's a data of public good, but who is going to pay for it? And that's, I would say, the entire challenge of environment as a space. Everybody uses it, but the problem of common goods or digital commons really starts to become a challenge.
Next question, following from your computing, I would assume right now that you don't have access to quantum computing. Am I right?
Say again?
You do not have access to quantum computing at the moment, right?
No, I don't think.
Okay.
We work off the cloud's infrastructure right now.
Okay, fine. So the reason I'm saying this is because in your analytics program, if you have access to quantum computing, then what you are doing in terms of analysis and giving out the deliverables.
It'll become much faster.
Oh, no, it's not just much faster. You can Google it and find out. Quantum computers squeeze time in computing. What would take normal supercomputers put together in the planet 420 years, it does it in 20 minutes. Right? And that's a fact.
Yeah.
So, in fact, they've used quantum computers to take out these vaccines for the pandemic. That's how the development has been so quick. So, what you're doing could help. So, perhaps maybe from Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, we can connect you with people or with entities or agencies which you can collaborate with, and which will, in fact, speed up your analytics to
process.
yeah.
That'll be fantastic. That's a business deal happening in public, people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do you have any more questions?
Thank you so much, Abhilasha. Maybe you
Thanks.
can